Top of the morning to you, Matt. It's St. Patrick's Day, in case you forgot. I think you forgot.
Oh, I did. I'm not wearing green. This won't be published on St. Patrick's Day.
It's
so
going to go out on Monday, but
you
we
ruined everything.
It was St. Patrick's Day. We'll probably cut this part out. But what we're actually going to talk about is not anything... Well, actually, are there Irish in this? Probably not. In any case, not Irish. No. But what Matt and I are going to talk about today, by the way, welcome. This is Dungeon Master of None. I'm Rob.
I'm Matt.
And we're going to talk today about Dragons Conquer America.
You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it'll change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll those dice.
And Matt, do you have anything you want to say about this before we jump into it?
Here's the basics. This is a Kickstarter that will be live, even though it's not St. Patrick's Day. This will be live when you're listening to this. This is its second Kickstarter. It's a core rule set, so it's a new system like, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition or Shadowrun. So the game has everything you need to play. It failed once before amid some significant controversy, and now it's being relaunched.
So the idea behind Dragons Conquer America is that it's, how do I want to put this? It's a reimagining, sort of an alternate fantasy history of the Spanish conquest of the New World, I guess is a way to put it. There are European dragons, and there are Mesoamerican dragons, and there's still Hernan Cortez and Montezuma and all the figures that you know and love from the supremely violent period of history that was the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs. And there's a lot of interesting things here, but that's the basic idea behind it. It's both a campaign setting and a new system. And let's talk a little bit about the system before we get into other things. Matt, does this resemble anything that you're familiar with? I was trying to read through the rules, and there's a deck of cards, but it can also play
you can
dice.
Use cards or dice, and if I remember this correctly, it's the same or a very similar system to a previously published transhuman RPG by the same publishers called Faith 2.0.
It was called Faith, and I haven't played Faith, and I'm not super familiar with the system, but it looks looks a little bit like, I want to say, sort of Fate-ish. It's rules light. There's successes and failures. There's basically like 4 categories of outcomes based on checks and or contests that you do, that your character does based on challenges or in conflict with NPCs. Without testing it, I can't say if it's good or bad, but so this is interesting. So a lot of Kickstarters don't have their own system; they work within an existing system, and so this is sort of an interesting challenge for the creators of Dragons Conquer America.
It seems very sort of storytelling-esque in that the main resolution, instead of rolling a die, though you can use dice, is sort of a series of flipping cards to see if you find out. You're very likely to end up with, instead of failing, some kind of Pyrrhic success where the dungeon master creates an additional, complication or bad thing that happens to you as you succeed in a task. So, if you, try and bribe the guards, maybe you succeed in bribing the guards, but now you're, you've alerted the main villain of your presence or something like that. It's very, there are a lot of games that have this kind of storytelling.
Right. I guess it's a little bit like Edge of Empire, right? It's got, I think in theory there's going to be proprietary cards or proprietary dice that have the different symbols on them that indicate the outcomes of your rolls or your draws. So that's potentially kind of interesting. This is sort of ambitious for a Kickstarter. In the past, there have been some pretty successful role-playing game Kickstarters, but they were all run by people with audiences or with a history. Monty Cook did one. I think wasn't Numeria.
Yeah, that was a Kickstarter.
It was a Kickstarter, a very, very successful one. But that's, of course, Monty Cook we're talking about here, a veteran of the industry and somebody with a large following and who can be trusted to do a good job with a role-playing game. But enough beating around the bush. Let's get to the meat of the issue. Let's get to the reason why anybody knows about Dragons Conquer America at all. Matt, do you want to start with this?
Sure. So, Dragons Conquer America, the theme of the RPG is there in the title. There's dragons, it's fantasy, it's about the confrontation between the not Spanish, the fantasy Spanish, and the fantasy Aztecs and other people of Meso and Central America. And it's set in the New World, except there's magic and dragons and monsters and things like that. Why this would strike anyone as controversial, I don't know, except, it's the foundation of empire, genocide, slavery, forced religious conversion, there's a lot of shit going down there.
Right, and Dragons Conquer America doesn't shy away from the source material. Kind of leans into it. There is actually a mechanic for human sacrifice in this game. You can perform ritual sacrifice and gain boons from it. There is slavery, there is murder. It does really try... Well, there's just like so much to talk about here, because I don't know that I think the authors believe themselves to be and intended to portray a fair accounting of this fantasy conquest of America. The Europeans are portrayed explicitly as bloodthirsty and rapacious and, having less than salubrious motives towards this conquest, but at the same time they're also portrayed as industrious and powerful and hyper competent, when in real life Cortez and most of the other conquerors of the Americas tripped dick first into success by happening to bring with them virulent diseases and stumble into political situations that were easy to exploit.
Right. And to the author's credit, right, they mentioned that, the Mexica or the Aztecs or whatever their fantasy stand-in, they rule over a bunch of people who are probably would be, ready to rebel given the opportunity and stuff like that. So, they acknowledge some of this, but again, you're asking people to role play Christian missionaries and Aztec sacrifices. This isn't even the main focus, but it's set in 1512, Spanish, Hispaniola, and Native America. They have specific spells that Jewish characters, or they say like Abrahamic priests, can cast. I'm like, this is like after the defining moment in the history of race and like the sort of the expulsion of Jews from Iberia, back to sort of other places in the Mediterranean, or if you went in the way of the Portuguese, shipping thousands of them to, was it Sao Tome or something like that? And there's not like a lot of acknowledgement of that, and I found that as someone who's looked at that a lot in history, a little glaring omission.
And from my end, as a student of colonial America, there's a lot of effort put into accurately or paying attention to the native peoples. I don't know what they're called in Dragons Conquer America. They're like the Meztica or something like that. But all of the native people. Sorry, Matt. Do they have a name?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
All of the native people are faux Aztecs, right? There's no real like Mayan equivalent or Inca equivalent. Like there were distinct, not just within the Aztec Empire, distinct cultures, but competing people groups and ethnicities and language families that had entirely different lifestyles and cultures and empires that I don't think are reflected in Dragons Conquer America. Dragons Conquer America seems to depict a new world that is all bloodthirsty Aztec warriors and, sultry sun priestesses.
Right. I mean, one of their, like, key arts is, like, some sort of Aztec sun priestess wearing absolutely nothing, showing a ton of underboob.
Ah, yes. The underboob.
But, so I mean, they do have
Yeah, go ahead.
They do have non-Aztec things. I think in the first Kickstarter, I don't know if it's lasted into now, there's, like, a class you can be, which is, like, Plains Warrior, like from the North
really?
American plains.
I was going through this.
Yeah, and
this one that you sent me doesn't have. It seems to be very, very Aztec focused. So maybe I'm wrong about this.
It's still in the art whether they cut the class or not. Like I can see on page 59 of the quick kickstart, like there's a warrior with like a shield. As people who lived in Oklahoma is quite familiar to us, and is wearing like deer skin.
Oh, I see. I see that
shirt with fringe, right?
Okay.
Which is again not sure if that's entirely accurate because remember those plains cultures hadn't formed yet because there weren't horses,
right?
So that's another non-historically accurate thing in this.
So maybe my criticism isn't entirely fair. Based on the 113-page quick start that I saw, I didn't see any real deviation from an Aztec theme, though in some of the art, Matt is correct, there appear to be some different variations on culture, definitely some Plains Indian types. This is an interesting point. This is something I wanted to bring up. So the art in this book is tremendous. They got a really one or more very talented artists to provide just terrific paintings and art for this. They depict what looks like a really cool game, but it also seems like they're really like leaning heavily on that art to carry them because the rules are, in my opinion, kind of incoherent, and there's a lot of info dumping, and of course there's the weird racial dynamics and cultural appropriation. So let's get to that. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, this is the heart of the matter.
I'm not. Yeah, this is what it's really.
The beating, living red heart of the matter.
Ripped from the chest of a human sacrifice. Yes. So I don't know if it started with this, but this was my introduction to it. There was a Waypoint, which is Vice's video game website or gaming website. Waypoint article written by an indigenous RPG player, or I believe so, who started by talking out about Shadowrun, which was an interesting point because Shadowrun does also have these weird racial dynamics, but the author was talking about how it allowed her and her friends, her queer POC friends, to play non-white characters, which was sort of unique for them. And so she came at it from, she saw what Dragons Conquer America was trying to attempt and found it to sort of fall short of the promise. It wasn't a particularly critical article, and it was really, a lot of it was a personal essay about the role of role-playing games in developing, a queer POC identity and how they were both good and bad. But I guess that this got the wrong sort of attention from certain corners of the internet, which I imagine none of you are surprised to imagine would find out about this. But the anti-SJW crew found out about Dragons Conquer America, I think already after or towards the end of the Kickstarter, failing the first time, and came out in full-throated support of it.
So a bunch of people dogpiled on in support of this game because someone accused it of, or didn't really accuse it of anything. The article was not as negative as it could have been. It's like, these issues are difficult and you should try and do better. It's really hard to set up your game to give a post-colonial experience to your players. And, you can't just have the original game, and I see they've taken it out in this new edition, had a tolerance mechanic where if you were intolerant, NPCs would react in a certain way and your characters would react in a certain way if they encountered people on different sides of the Atlantic, I suppose. Is there anything wrong with having fantasy world that has the Spanish with dragons and the Aztecs with Couatls and a world that sort of resembles that.
So that's the thing. I don't think there's anything actually wrong with this. And going back to the Waypoint article, this can be very complicated, and it's not at all hard to understand why people saw this criticism and said, well, these RPG creators tried to be racially sensitive and they tried to represent the indigenous lifestyle. So why are you getting on their nuts about it? And SJWs are going too far again. But it's the criticism of the Waypoint article was spot on, and that's a post-colonial project is different than an anti-racist one, right? They're similar, but you're doing different things. And so I don't know that the game is explicitly racist, but it was trying in a sense to be post-colonial and sort of failed. It got halfway there. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So here's the problem, is that there were these very reasonable criticisms raised, and instead and here's a lesson to literally everybody. If somebody raises a criticism of your project, whether it's a movie or a game or a book or whatever, and they say, hey, this is misogynistic, this is racist, or especially if they level a mild criticism saying, you could be more sensitive to this topic, say,
your game about the genocide of America makes me feel a little queasy. Maybe you should change some things.
Right. Don't say we're not racists, we're not sexist. Say, I hear you. We'll talk to some people in the right communities and try to do better. That's it. This is also what happened with Kingdom Come Deliverance. Rather than just saying, sorry, we'll look into it, we'll see if we can do better, Daniel Vavra, whatever his name was, like, no, there are no black people in Bohemia. And it's just, whether or not, like, you actually believe it, like, this is just like a basic lesson in PR. Just say, okay, I hear you, we'll try to do better. And instead of getting, the outrage machine ginned up and ending up on the, looking like an asshole, everybody will move on. This is just like one thing that the creators of Dragons Conquer America just absolutely dropped the ball on. Because they in multiple threads, so they had a thread on our RPG about this, where most people were like, oh, those SJWs went too far, it looks great, I'm going to support the Kickstarter. But some people were like, hey, so why not just bring in an indigenous consultant? And the authors just kept saying, well, we're not racist, and we're not going to do that because it doesn't have anything to do with anything. And it does, though. It's not pandering. It's not, bowing to the whims of something. It's not compromising your vision to bring in somebody with a different cultural perspective. It helps you make a better game. It helps you make a more accessible and a better situated and more richly considered project if you bring in different perspectives. And that's there's no like controversy around that. It's very easy to prove, and it's very demonstrable, especially in modern, creative pursuits.
If I had a pistol, I could join a revolution just like Trey. Imagine me hunkered down low in the sugar cane, watching Havana burning.
To give a little bit of a spicy take and to put my historian hat on, I think I partially blame this sort of failure to consider other voices a little bit on, the authors are Spanish from Spain.
Yep.
And I don't think,
and of course, the writer is Mexican, so
the writer is Mexican.
This complicates things,
I think,
but not indigenous.
Right, but it's my understanding the main author, the guy who considers himself an RPG auteur, right, who created the concept from the beginning, is from Spain. And the same criticism can be leveled at many places, including the United States, is I don't think Spanish historians and the education system there does at all a very good job of teaching about the history of Spanish colonialism.
Almost certainly not. And this is a failure of Western canon. This is the great failing of all history making in the 20th century. A problem that we're going to spend probably the next century undoing. But Matt and I, as filthy postmodern historians ourselves, are keenly aware of the failings of a lot of history making in the past 100, 150 years, and most places have not caught up to a more fully considered and culturally diverse understanding of history.
And if we're talking about, so who is around, I know this game says it's explicitly set in 1512. It's there on the title. You've already taken the liberty to add in some characters that could be Plains Indians from North America. The author's mentioned he's gonna add in the Incas, which did not encounter the Spanish for at least another decade. But I see no mention at all of any African sort of characters or influences in the art or in the things. And I don't remember the first date of the first slaves sent to New Spain, right? This game is set before New Spain was created, but there was almost 100% there were black sailors and retainers and other people in Cortez's entourage, right? We have art and records that prove this, and these people are particularly left out. And the fact that, this was I feel like hasn't been addressed, and the same that thing that hasn't been addressed, there's no, if you're going to do historical mechanics on different religions and things like that, if you're not putting in your art specifically, people of Muslim and Jewish faiths who were almost, again, recent conversos and were part of the settlement of Spain, right? It wasn't just, people from Castile. It was people from Catalonia and Aragon and Portugal and Italy and North Africa and West Africa, and, people who were Jewish who had converted and maybe all the way, maybe not all the way, all these types of things. And of course, these are very tricky things to talk about, but, those people are also not included. And if I cared about experiencing those things, then I'm left out. And that's to make the Shadowrun experience comparison again. Shadowrun has a million different problems. One of those problems isn't that you, since it is set on something inspired by the real world, if you want to draw your inspiration from something in the real world, either in a cool way or a problematic way, you can still do that. And Dragons of Conquers America, as it stands right now, doesn't even let the players experience the full breadth of human experience and humanity in 1512.
Exactly right. It's so narrowly considered, and this is another failing of the way that we tend to talk about history. But it was, in terms of the people involved and the diversity of experience, so much more richly considered than what we tend to learn in school. And it wasn't just Catholic, Jesuit, Spaniards, and Aztecs. There were so many other people there. And also, in addition to missing out on any sort of African experience, I don't see any Caribbean Indians or anything like that. Any
right? If you're talking non-Aztec Indians, the Taino, the Caribs, the Arawak, they're all there. They were all part of Cortez's expedition. Right?
This is all history nerd stuff, and so we're not actually upset that they're not included. It feels like, to place such an emphasis on this being a historical project and to leave so much out just feels like a missed opportunity. And more to the point, I think that the authors continue to insist, and I do think they really did try to balance and be fair to the indigenous peoples in their game, and to make them noble and wonderful and powerful in their own way, and to not be explicitly racist, and to not, celebrate the genocide of Native Americans. But in doing so, they have very obviously fetishized these people. They have created a recreated the noble savage myth. The way that they have portrayed their indigenous player characters is they're all beautiful, sultry Aztec sun priestesses, and ski slope nose warriors with bulging muscles and fierce scowls, and it's better, I suppose, than making them non-persons who just exist to be slaughtered by Europeans, but it's still only halfway there. They're not really full people. They're still just caricatures.
I agree. I think the art sort of bears that out. And I mean, it's when you come from the perspective of this is the meeting of two cultures, though in fact three, right? This is European, African, and American cultures meeting together. You're going to have a problem portraying that in a way that would be satisfying for players. But I think we should move the conversation to something bigger. You mentioned earlier that, this Waypoint article, talked about Shadowrun and how in Shadowrun the game is designed to tell the stories. You can do lots of different things, but the game is really, when you're Shadowrunners, you're fucking sticking it to the man and stealing from corporations. And, you can work for corporations, right? But yeah, I've never played a Shadowrun game where we're like evil agents for a corporation.
Right, nobody actually wants to do that.
Right, we take jobs from them, right? But we're never like just their complete stooges, right? And so the game engenders the sort of play of, you're fighting against these things, right?
Right. The author of the Waypoint article specifically says Shadowrun isn't a post-colonial game, but it lets you tell post-colonial stories, right? That's the success of Shadowrun, is that even though it's not designed perfectly well, it gives you the freedom to tell the right kinds of stories.
And a game like Dungeons and Dragons, where the setting is, pretty vague and stuff like that, you can really tell any type of story you want, some better than others. But let's look at, with the materials we've seen so far, with the setup of, again, it's 1512, the Spanish have bases in the Caribbean, they're just encountering the sort of more powerful empires of Mesoamerica. It seems like the default is that you're sort of groups of adventurers of both Iberian and American origin sort of mixed together, which I've not really explained how those groups are created, sort of, and you can do jobs for either side or discover ancient temples and then use your weapons or power to help out either the Spanish or the Mexica. So is this setup, what sort of play does that facilitate? So I want to go to something bigger. Does the setup, this sort of, the Spanish are ready to invade, or the Iberians are ready to invade America. There's these powerful empires that also have magic. The Spanish have dragons. I guess the player characters are like usually supposed to be a mix of people from both cultures that are like exploring ancient ruins and finding magical artifacts. Does this sort of basic setup of the game facilitate a type of play that lets people tell interesting stories and maybe, anti-colonial stories? Or is it really just set up to be like, you should get on dragons and fucking raise Tenochtitlan?
There really is basically the way that it's been set up. There's only one type of story to tell, and that's a conflict between conquistadors and Aztecs, basically. And that's not unappealing. For me, I would relish the opportunity to play a Jaguar warrior and, bash some Spanish heads in. I think that sounds like fun. I would absolutely play in that campaign. But it is limiting. And I wonder if it wouldn't be better to situate this as a board game. Something like one where you're playing out a scenario where there are two sides, which is more structured, rather than positioning this as a tabletop RPG, because there really isn't the flexibility to tell a lot of different types of stories. So I haven't gone through all of the playtest materials, but the one that's offered in the book is, it looks like fun. It's there's a dragon egg, and two different groups are searching for it. But even within that, it's still very much, you've got the conquistadors on one side and the party group on the other. And
right, do you give the egg to the Spanish, or do you give it to
that's
the
fun,
Mexican,
that's interesting,
right?
But after a while, it's going to be the same story over and over again, and you're affecting or trying to affect the course of the war between the two people, and that's really the only story that's being told, is how will the conquest of America by Spanish people riding dragons play out.
I feel like this is implicit in this, in that the author has said, well, later on we're going to add Inca classes and stuff like that. In real history, the conquest of the Inca could never have happened without first the conquest of Mexico. That's just how it went down. So I feel like the author's assuming that, it's going to play out. It's going to be the same, but with magic. And so in the next 10 years of the in-game world, and his original Kickstarter, and I think one of the reasons the original one failed, had a living campaign. It was really ambitious, and I sort of feel like the living campaign was, the first year is the Spanish conquest of Mexico. The second year is the Spanish conquest of Peru.
We're reading into this a little bit, but I feel comfortable in saying that I do think that the authors believed that the Spanish would still conquer America. That was still the inevitable outcome, even though there's magic and dragons and things.
There's all these weird things like, okay, so history's the same, but there's magic, right? There's a reference to Crusader dragons fighting Saladin's Jinn army in the Levant. But I think, is there a way to fix this? Could this be?
Well, yeah, of course. So here's
better?
What I don't get. Why does it have to be Spain and Mexico? Why we're not idiots. There are any number of fantasy projects that are very obviously inspired by real life historical events, but there's no reason why they can't be the Hispaniards from, Española and, fighting the Maztecos from, wherever. Those are terrible names. But you get what I'm saying, right? This doesn't have to be actually Mexico and actually Spain. You can tell a conquest story. You can tell this story with dragons without having it be those actual people. It doesn't need to be Cortez and Montezuma. And it would still need to do a good job of portraying this post-colonial idea, but it would give so much more flexibility, and I have no idea why they wouldn't do that. The art could be literally exactly the same. You could be telling the exact same story, but it can be two different fantasy nations, which would allow so much more flexibility and room for exploration and innovation and inventiveness, both on the creator's part and the player's part.
Yeah, I think that's one way to do it. If it was me...
Well, you did do this. This is something that you have done.
I did do this. And I would say, take a step back and say, why tell the exact same story of something that already happened in history, which, by the way, is a pretty shitty story. It involves the enslavement and death of millions of people, and the foundations of modern ideas of race and intolerance and all these kinds of things is all wrapped up in the history of Iberia and the history of Iberian encounters in Africa and America. But you could here would be, I think, an interesting starting point for the campaign. If you're so invested in the idea that Spanish have dragons, which in the campaign all the dragon riders are women. Okay. I just remembered that. But so okay, you're invested in this idea. They cross the ocean, they establish a foothold in the Caribbean, and they try and conquer Mexico, but all of a sudden the Mexica have Couatls, which are giant feathered serpents, and they defeat them. And this is the first defeat to the powerful Spanish Empire of Charles the Immortal, who rules half of Europe. And all of a sudden, there's an interesting conflict. It's an uneasy truce. Will war break out again, right? And then, you've rewritten this history.
Why tell the same story? Why have fantasy elements and just retell the way that history actually went down? Why not present an interesting what if? How would things change? And it doesn't seem like a lot of opportunity has been taken here to say, oh, this is how things might be different, because really it's basically at the time of the campaign, as this quick start document seems to indicate, it's mostly the same. Like, maybe it's a little bit harder for the Spanish to win, but in general it still looks like the conquest is proceeding much the same way that it did in real life, and that just seems like, why bother? It seems like a wasted opportunity.
If the Mexica and other peoples of America have magic, well then, they can fucking
that's right.
not die from smallpox, right? That's interesting, right? The Spanish would have never conquered Mexico in the way they did if, there were not diseases.
So I don't think so. Some of the criticism of this Kickstarter has been unfair, but most of it is pretty mild and fair, and the authors haven't responded to it particularly gracefully. It's not explicitly racist, I will say that. I do think that they have made some mistakes that are problematic for sure, but I don't think they set out to make a racist game. However, they have fallen short of what I think they intended to do, and if they were listening more carefully to the criticisms that were leveled against Dragons Conquer America, they could make a much better game.
The author, really, wants to make a game that is about, road to El Dorado, swashbuckling adventurers, explore the untamed wilds of America, sort of maybe you correctly realize that, you can't really just make that game without being very, very in the colonialist mindset, added in the second half that, the Americans have adventurers too and magic too, but then hasn't gotten beyond having a vision after tacking that on.
And so earlier we asked, is there a right way to do this? And I absolutely think that there is. And I think that the authors have set about with the right intention, but haven't fully followed through. And for me, the issue is very much that they've gotten halfway there, that they've tried to give indigenous peoples in this agency, but instead they've just sort of half-assed it and made them, like I said, noble savages, objects of fetishization, again, sexy Aztec babes and noble Aztec warriors, and that's better, again, than just being cannon fodder, but it's still not quite good enough. It's not giving them they're not giving them fully realized personalities and lives and cultures.
Right, and which is why I think, and I don't know if this is actually the case, but I have a hunch that, like, moving the timeline of saying, the Spanish tried to conquer Mexico, and they failed because the powerful Aztec Empire has a lot of magic, and they ride Couatls instead of dragons, and there were some cool dragon battles, and now the two sides are on an uneasy truce, fixes a lot of things, because as it's set up, right, the game is set up before the most traumatic event in the history of of Mexico, and one of the most traumatic events in the history of the world, where millions and millions of people died from a disease, were practically enslaved on plantations, and we started one of the world's first racial hierarchies. And you're just sort of like, so that's gonna happen. I'd be like, we
don't fully realize that this was a genocide, and a genocide on par with any that the modern world has had to offer. An absolute just bloodbath and catastrophe, population collapse. And it's one thing to not have a full historical understanding of that. It's another thing entirely to replay that event without heavily couching it and, providing context, and I don't know, there's just not a great way to relive that experience, which is why Matt's suggestion of just don't do it that way. Have it be different. If there's magic, then let's not have the genocide.
again, to sort of, at least my final 2 cents in summary is, I don't think the authors of the game are trying to be racist. They're not trying to be pro-colonialist, and I don't think they want to make a game that is that. They just, I feel like, lack the tools and language and experience to adequately make a game that still doesn't have
and this stuff is
racist
complicated.
and colonial tropes.
We're still living in the colonial experiment. Right. This is the whole problem of the West in the 20th and 21st century, is that it's so hard to extract your mindset from racism, from colonialism, from patriarchy, from imperialism, because that is the world as it exists. You can't think outside of the box because you live in the box, and you have always lived in the box. And Matt and I, we're not perfect. We're both white guys. Like, we get this wrong all the time, but we have studied history and spent a lot of time studying history, and so we can sort of get a better picture of this. But it's not easy. It took me a long time to get here. And so, like, I'm willing to be understanding, but it's so frustrating to watch people like this not take criticism, good, mild, mostly gentle criticism that's really very easy to meet, and just fail to act on something that could make their game significantly better.
The response to the criticism is the thing that, is really the big failing here. Like, I feel like I read one part of the an interview with the author, and they're like, well, why don't you, get an indigenous author or consultant from, Mesoamerica, from Mexico, and he said something like, well, it's been 500 years. What connection does that person have to the people I'm trying to tell? I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah, rethink this, buddy. Yeah, not a good look. That's just not the point, and it just, like, represents a failure to understand. Yeah, so yeah, I'm looking at this thread from the author, and somebody asks a very reasonable question. Don't you think the smart thing to do is to sit down with some indigenous folks so you can find out ways to tweak the game to address concerns about it being racist, colonialist, etc.? Right? That's a very, like, reasonable thing to ask, right? It's not asking him to, like, do a whole lot. It's just, hey, why not sit down with some people? And then his response is, I see what you mean, and I guess it would be the best marketing move. But that's the problem. It is a marketing move. Sitting down with indigenous folk to get an internet approval seems like being a politician and kissing babies. I would be using real people to dress up a game. The game is not racist nor pro-colonialist, etc., etc., etc. So it just, my position continues to be that the game's content has to be supervised by experts on the subject, regardless of their heritage.
Yeah, but oh my god, it's just
that's
like
the thing. That's
you're
the funniest part
obviously
of this.
not an expert on the subject. You haven't. I mean, if you're an expert on the subject, like, there would be Jewish and more and black characters in the game, and Caribs and Arawaks, but I guess I forgive you for forgetting that because you're not an expert on the subject. But now you're saying I'm not going to sit down with experts on these specific
and this is
subjects.
what I mean when I say that it fails to understand history, because history isn't just a collection of facts. And anybody who tells you that is an idiot and has never studied history. We all, like, every historical project, every attempt to quantify the past is done through a perspective and a viewpoint, and shaped by the sources and shaped by the perspective of the author or the writer. That's just very obvious. That is historiography 101. You will learn that in your very first history class.
In any history program you take.
To talk about how they perceive this historical project isn't pandering. It isn't marketing. It isn't, appealing to the masses, trying to assuage the savage SJWs. It's telling better history, because you need multiple perspectives. You need multiple viewpoints to get a fuller, better, not objective, not true history, because no such thing exists, but the more you can bring in different viewpoints, the richer your historical project will be. And that's just basic shit. And I get tired of having to explain this to people, but it apparently is not intuitive.
and this is again I think frustrating thing. I don't think anyone who's criticizing this project really wants to see it fail. Like, everyone who's criticized is like, you could tell a different type of story with this game by making these changes, but you still seem to want to cling to your brave conquistadors with their funny little turned up helmets hacking through the jungle while dudes wearing atlatls or wielding atlatls like stalk them in the bushes.
And that's the thing, like, this is fun. Like, this is interesting and new. Like, yes, let's tell some post-colonial stories, or let's tell some stories. Like, yes, I am so tired of...
We're always telling stories that are sort of based in, like, the late medieval period with shining knights. It's like, it's only 50 years until this, like, this crazy confluence and a set of encounters between Europeans, Africans, and Americans.
Yeah, let's tell some different stories. Let's do some different settings. I love this. I think it's a cool idea. I think it's deeply flawed and, kind of restrictive, but I would love to play a game. I would love to play an RPG that takes place in this very interesting conflict, in this very, very pivotal moment in history. I love that. I love that idea. I am so tired of playing in the Middle Ages. I have no interest in playing another generic D&D Western Europe campaign. But so I would like to see more of this. I would like this to succeed, but I feel like it needs to be done in the right way. And I think that's what most of the criticism is.
Yeah. Cortez was dragon.
I did say when we started this,
he was a
I just
dragon
said to Matt
man.
that I could talk about this for at least an hour, and we have. And there's more to say, and I'm gonna keep an eye on the Kickstarter and see what happens. I hope that the alt-right doesn't latch onto this and make it their cause celebre for the month, because that would just be disappointing, and I don't think that really is what the authors want or what the game deserves. But it seems like every time anything, even like any mild like cultural appropriation conversation comes up, that a certain demographic shows up on the other side to support the criticized property just because it happens to be on the right side of the conversation. And I really, really hope that doesn't happen here.
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversations going on around D&D and inclusion in RPGs, and you never think you have to say it, but you always have to say it, right, in the punk voice that I cannot do.
Nazi role players, fuck off. And yes, you should fuck off if you're a Nazi role player.
Fuck off.
There was another Kickstarter property that Matt and I wanted to talk about, but I think that I could spend an equal amount of time talking about that, and we are almost at the end. So let us leave you with just some parting thoughts. History is complicated. It is okay to try to represent indigenous peoples and try to tell a different story, and it's not necessarily racist to do what Dragons Conquer America does, but listen to criticisms, get some additional perspectives, try to do better, and it doesn't have to be like this, folks. It ain't so hard.
Signing off from somewhere over Tenochtitlan as a sexy nun on the back of a scaly dragon. We are Dungeon Master of None.
Yeah, signing off from in the shadows of a scary totem. I'm a dude wearing a sealskin outfit and staring out at the Pacific Ocean. We'll see you all next time. This is Rob, and this has been
Ta-ta.
Dungeon Master of None.
Bye-bye.
Have a good week, everybody.